Welcome to Eavesdropping at the Movies. I'm Mike.
And I'm Jose.
And we've just seen The Phantom Thread, the latest film by Paul Thomas Anderson.
Is it The Phantom Thread or just Phantom Thread? The Phantom Thread sounds like a Star Wars movie.
No, well, I guess it's down as Phantom Thread, I suppose, so let's just call it Phantom Thread. I know my brother has been talking about this for a while. He's seen it a couple of times already. And he's quite beguiled by it. And he's keen to come on the podcast and talk about it, which I think is probably a good idea, because quite frankly, I haven't got the foggiest.
Really?
I'm a little bit nonplussed by it.
I love it.
I did not love it, but I'm nonplussed by it.
Well, nonplussed kind of implies that it had no effect on you whatsoever, that you kind of endured it.
No, that's not true. I didn't endure it. I don't think that's what that implies, but I feel like I'm kind of slightly lost with it. Like, I know I liked it, and I enjoyed kind of living in the world that it was portraying. And I think it's kind of, it's got a beautiful mood and a tone, and it flows. And I think the use of music to keep it moving is great. And I think the performances are beautiful. But I don't know what I can say about it. Let's just briefly say what it's about before we go into spoiler territory. So it's about this fashion designer and dressmaker, Reynolds Woodcock, who's played by Danny Day-Lewis, in what is supposed to be his last role. Yes. And he's quitting acting with this one.
I don't believe it.
Well, we'll see. And he's renowned. He makes dresses for kings and queens and all the highest in society.
Yes. I wondered if it was based on Norman Hartnell, because really he was the only famous British couturier of that period. Of this is like the post-war period. It's the 50s, isn't it? That it says.
Yeah, it is the 50s.
He was the only British competition to Chanel and Dior and Balenciaga and people like that in the post-war period.
Okay, so Reynolds runs this business with his sister, played by Leslie Manville.
Who is divine.
It's fantastic, and he's a bachelor. He goes to the country, to some place in the country that he has, and he meets this waitress, played by Vicky Creeps. I think that's how you pronounce her surname.
Yes.
And he invites her to dinner, and they begin this relationship where she's kind of half actual romantic partner and half muse. Although she kind of, their relationship is not physical early on, but it's kind of intellectual and emotional.
Yes.
In a kind of reserved way, I guess. She becomes his kind of central muse. Yes. In a way. And he invites her to live in his home. So the business is run out of this kind of stately townhouse in London.
Yes.
I guess that's as far as you can say with that. I mean, that's really what's set up in the trailers. So before getting into spoiler territory, that's the premise.
Yes. I think it's important. I mean, the things that struck me in those first scenes was just how beautiful Vicky Creeps is. But in this very serene, self-possessed, quiet way where, right from the beginning that she's open to anything and she's this match, but actually in this very downplayed way. Kind of, all of the information is kind of conveyed through tiny gestures, really, that are very self-possessed, very self-assured. Yeah.
She has this way of holding her head kind of straight neck, sort of, it's got this almost kind of superior attitude to it, where it's not like she's looking down on people, but it has this kind of very well-mannered sort of attitude to the way she holds herself, which I really like.
Yes. She looks like
a well-brought-up person, basically, like the way people kind of were, like kind of well-bred.
She looks like that figure in what's the pearl earring. Yeah,
Go with the pearl earring.
the girl with the earring, and like in that painting, really. So she looks like a figure of like Dutch painting or something, like quiet, self-possessed, concentrated. Yeah. And she evokes that. I think she's extraordinarily beautiful. You can see entirely what he sees in her, and actually you can see completely what she sees in him, because one of the lovely things about seeing Daniel Day-Lewis in this film is he's every year his age. But he's extraordinarily handsome, I find. And he's so interesting to look at. Again, it's a performance of small gestures, of the way that he walks. It's slightly kind of pigeon-toed, and his stillness. And I think there's only about 3 times where he smiles in the film, and actually each time he smiles, it evokes like a world. Really, it kind of comes across as a major.
Yeah, like he smiles internally, and then the actual smile on the surface on his face is like the tip of the iceberg. So it suggests so much more about what he's feeling than it shows.
Yes,
it's the most I've kind of liked him, just on a sort of on like a personal level, for a very long time. Which is not to say that I think we've probably spoken before a little bit about how you and I both find him a little bit cold sometimes. I think you said the same thing about Gary Oldman. The idea of them being the idea of their performances being mannered, and you sort of notice details. But I think he comes with this reputation, Daniel Day-Lewis, as being like one of the greats, and so you are before you watch him, it's like you are being tuned in to notice that, and then the fact that you notice it, you go, well, I noticed it. Like, it's your fault in a way that you noticed it.
No, but he is a distant actor, actually. I do think that, there are people who you just warm to and love. Like, it's very unfashionable to say this now, I suppose, but for example, people like Mel Gibson in his prime always cheered me up seeing him. I always felt he was like a transparent and accessible actor, right? Like, until he went off his rocker. But, then there are other actors, and I think it's partly through their choice of roles. So, Daniel Day-Lewis, it's extraordinary to what extent he plays unpleasant characters or closed-off characters, or characters who are open, and available, but, like in My Left Foot, right, where he's kind of, every one of his feelings is made kind of apparent. But he's being kind of very nasty and willful, and and so on, because of his disability. So his choice of roles, and my God, there will be blood, and so he always plays unpleasant characters. The only exception to this that I can find a little bit is in the Michael Mann film, where he plays that Indian tracker.
I don't know.
Oh.
What about Lincoln?
I don't like him in Lincoln.
But he's not unlikable in that. It's just...
I hate Lincoln.
But he's not unlikable in that. He's supposed to be towering and powerful and all-knowing.
But I think that's the kind of performance that gives the haters their ammunition.
Yeah.
Because you can see every thought, that's gone into every gesture. It seems like so fully put on, really. So... Like, you are seeing the wheels turning constantly.
Well, all of this to say that that's not the way I felt about his character in this.
Yes.
His performance in this.
I loved him.
I felt I really believed him, and I felt like I understood who he was, in a way, and found him natural and believable. There's a thing as well with Paul Thomas Anderson films where, again, they come with this cachet that you're expecting that everything means something and everything is significant. You must be noticing everything all the time. And there are moments in this where actually there's a kind of quotidian aspect. So the way that his company works, and all the ladies come in making the dress, and you kind of get these montages of just the work being done, and there's one particular that I'm thinking of where they're having breakfast in the morning and he's happy that morning, which is unusual for him, and he's offering porridge and he's doing this, that and the other, and there's a mood and a tone to that actually you feel like you feel is very natural, as opposed to being like, oh, what does the porridge mean?
Yes.
It's just the general. There's a more kind of general aspect, which I think is not the case in The Master or in There Will Be Blood, where things do feel more deliberate the whole way through.
Though I think this is quite deliberate as well.
I don't mean accidental, but I mean there is less weight, I think, attached to certain things.
Whilst I was watching it, and I really truly loved it, I thought, oh, this is going to put off a lot of people, because in many ways it's a film about art and artists, right? So it is kind of very fairy in that way. I mean, this is a man who's actually slightly autistic in a way. Like, he can think of only one thing, and
he needs routine.
And any little thing throws him off. And the film is wonderful about demonstrating how just sounds, ruin his day and prevent him from working. So, but it is somebody who's enthralled to his craft, right? Like, he goes to sleep thinking about, the dresses he's going to make. He wakes up thinking about the dresses he's going to make. He chooses his girlfriend because, she's got the best posture to wear those dresses, And so, like, it's a life that's kind of, like, wrapped up in art making, really. That's kind of, what the film is about, I think. And then, of course, the message about the Phantom Threads is you see him as a person who's so obsessed with his art that he's closed himself off to life, right? And so he's basically in a dialogue with, his idea of beauty, his mother, right? And a kind of a secret inner life that, that is really hidden away. And I think kind of, the phantom thread in a way is a metaphor for that, because what he does is he puts messages, pictures, things that are meaningful to him, or messages that he wants to convey to people, but he puts them into linings of clothes.
Yeah, right? Where only he knows
that are there, right? So actually, in a way, it's kind of like a dialogue with himself, which kind of keeps him closed off from other people. And I think kind of, so I think one kind of extrapolates, with that, and critique it, really, because, if that's kind of the way that Paul Thomas Anderson or actually Woodcock sees, his art, it's kind of like a dialogue with his phantasms, with the ghosts of his past, with his ideas. It's really a kind of like a dialogue with his life, as he himself conceives it in a way that closes off everybody else.
Do you think the film falls into cliches of the tortured artist? The tortured artist and the muse who suffers due to him and that sort of thing.
I think it does, but I think the film is so interesting because it kind of turns the tables on it, right? So the whole thing is about unlocking this kind of autism. This him being so wrapped up in one idea and of himself. And actually, the only way that this woman who loves him can do it is by making him ill.
He's a man surrounded by women.
Yes.
Every other character in the film, other than him, every other significant character is a woman.
Yes.
Really, the only other guy is a doctor who shows up twice. It's not that important.
Yes.
But there's his sister who runs his company and kind of knows how to handle him.
It was wonderful.
And he doesn't mince words. Like, everyone kind of talks in subtext, and she will initially talk in subtext, and then she'll just come out and say what she means.
Yes.
Like, I can't remember exactly what it's when she wants the doctor to look at him, and I forget. She basically says the doctor's here. And the subtext is get out the room. And Alma doesn't leave the room, so she says, "Okay, I'm just going to be clear. Get out the room."
Yes.
she does that a couple of times. So there's her. She knows how to kind of deal with him, and she's quite forthright. Obviously, there's Alma, who's the love interest and the muse and the person who kind of activates him and so on. Everyone else who works on the dresses is a woman. And also he's making dresses for women.
Yes.
Like, that he also can make suits and things. Like, he talks about the suit that he's made for himself.
Yes.
With his mother's lock of hair in it. So, like, he can do other stuff, but the whole focus is on making dresses for women. And then, of course, there's his mother, who
appears as a ghost.
Appears as a ghost, and is someone who he kind of deeply misses, and tries to keep with him all the time. I wasn't a huge fan of the bit where she shows up as a ghost, I must say. Well, she doesn't show up as a ghost. She shows up in a kind of fever dream that he has while he's ill.
Yes. I love that.
I don't like when I had the same problem with Three Billboards with the Dia scene. I don't like when people talk to hallucinations. I find it kind of hacky. I don't think it's. I think this film does it about as well as I've ever seen it, and it still feels just nonsense to me.
I liked it because then when she comes into the room, right, she's a living, breathing woman. She's not like a figment of his imagination or a thread into his past. You know, she's there and she's an other and she loves him and he loves her, right? And so kind of you see this act of replacement, you know, kind of happening kind of visually for you, really, as she enters the room. So, I mean, it might be a hackneyed idea, but I loved it.
Well, yeah, I think it's done as well as I've ever seen it. So I guess that's. I mean, it's damning with faint praise, I suppose. But it's just, but with the mother, basically the mother is important twice. Where she's introduced as when he meets Alma and he's showing her the photo of his mother and talks about how he secreted this lock of hair in his coat so he can keep her close. And then when she shows up. In this dream, it feels like it's trying to be made more important than it is. I don't
know. I didn't question it. I can imagine, you know, how that would be important. But I also think that the film is critiquing this idea of him being so wrapped up in the past and so connected, so threaded to his past. You know, and what he sees is arguably the only person who understood him and helped him and taught him his craft, he says, that he's now oblivious to his present and his future. You know,
so that's the phantom thread.
I think so.
The phantom of his past. And how poetic of you.
Yeah,
no, that's quite good.
I mean, I don't know, but that's my interpretation. Right.
Well, it's better than mine because I don't have one. So well done.
Yeah. So anyway,
no, I like it.
You know, I think the task of the Vicky Creeps character is, you know, to make him present, really. And that's why it's so interesting that the only way that she can make him present, be there with her in the way that she wants, which she says is open and kind of accessible, but also needy, that he needs her, right? Is to poison him. Yeah,
so basically she poisons him once. And then by the time she poisons him a second time, she cooks this omelette with poisoned mushrooms in front of him, and he figures out that it was her before, and she talks about wanting him to be weak and need her and to kind of put in a position where he needs to lower his defences, and let her in, and he very pointedly takes a bite of this omelette in front of her. That's this kind of, okay, this is what we'll do, and then their relationship is kind of re-energized, and they're winking at each other and flirting while the doctor's there not having a clue that they did this deliberately.
But I thought, to me, that was like so romantic.
Yeah,
because,
no, I agree.
You know, I mean, what he's saying, it's weird
that they have a relationship based on repeated attempted assassination.
Yes, but that's not what it's about, right? And actually, but the romantic gesture in that is, you know, if you want to poison me, I'm willing to die for you. You know, and it kind of, you know, and then it goes on from there, because of course she doesn't want to kill him. You know, she just wants him to need her and to,
So they've basically she's brought into his life, and then the honeymoon period wears off quite quickly, and he starts finding her quite annoying in these ways. And there's that brilliant scene which you alluded to earlier, where they're having breakfast. And the sound design of her spreading butter on toast and clinking things and pouring water, the sound is piercing and crisp, and it's destroying his morning. And then she poisons him when it all kind of gets a bit too much. She poisons him, and then as he recovers, he says, "I love you, marry me," and this kind of, it's rekindled. And then they get married, and then it devolves back into annoyances and sniping at each other and so on. And again, it's when she poisons him the second time, it's rekindled. So that they clearly love each other, but it's a very weird kind of damaged sort of love that they need. That it's unhealthy, to say the least.
I don't know. I mean, what do you think of the film visually?
I think it's extraordinarily beautiful. As far as I know, Paul Thomas Anderson is now his own sort of lighter and cinematographer. I will double check.
I thought there was a cinematographer credited.
I will double check. Paul Thomas Anderson, director of photography, uncredited.
Oh,
He's
case,
writer, director, and
kudos to him.
cinematographer. So he's. I mean, it's lit and shot so beautifully and so evocative. There's almost like this feeling of slight fog over some of the images.
Yes.
The way that people are half in shadow and half in light. And
but I think there's two things. So on the one hand, I do think it's lit like a Vermeer painting. That's the word I was searching for before. It does have like this chiaroscuro, but it also does have like this kind of amber lighting, really. It's kind of, it glows. But also I think you're right. It glows, but on the other hand, it's also slightly faded, as if it was shot in old stock, or the 1950s are evoked really through kind of the images themselves, the texture of the images themselves, which look kind of slightly fading. They're not as sharp as kind of you're used to now. So it has like a wonderful palette. But it also has wonderful imagery, like the scenes at the Chelsea Arts Ball, I think, are just divine, really. And also the scenes when they go to Switzerland, right? Kind of, the mountains. Fantastic. The scene where it kind of begins to snow, it's just so beautiful, in London. I thought it's glorious to look at and to kind of, be immersed in. And I think this is really a picture to see in the cinema, because it's one of those where, kind of all the slightest gestures matter, but also kind of, the quality of the image and things like the texture of the dresses, right? So kind of, the film in a way is a fashion show as well. Like there's all these dresses, right? But the kind of the fabric of these dresses evokes the 1950s. There's these silks, right, and kind of these cloths that fold up, kind of hard, and they have like a particular texture and shine, and so I think it's kind of. I think it's important to see it on a big screen, partly for that, partly. Because the performances are all very, very understated. It is kind of it is the type of performances where a slight kind of lift of the eyes is significant, You think?
Yeah. Yeah, it's certainly significant is perhaps too strong a word to put in it, but evocative, I would say. Like, it's not like a raising of the eyebrows necessarily means a huge deal, but it conveys a kind of feeling and a tone.
Well, you've got to be able to see it because it's meaningful. That's kind of what I was getting.
Oh, well, that's definitely. There is only one scene in the film that I think is truly memorable, which is the conversation over the omelette at the end, where it all kind of becomes quite plain and moments of hell. There's a whole thing of, will he eat the omelette or what's he going to do, and is he going to accuse him? Which, and I think there were more moments like that in his last few films. I think in The Master there was the
I love The Master,
the interview scene, which is extraordinary, and in There Will Be Blood, more or less every conversation in There Will Be Blood between Daniel Plainview and Eli has that feeling of important kind of gigantitude, for lack of a real word, which is not to say that is a failing in this film. This film is I think, evoking something slightly different. I think this film has more of a feeling of punch drunk love. It flows more. It feels like it's less kind of trying to be. I mean, those films are about big personalities clashing and coming into contact with each other. This film is not quite that.
I think
it's about the evolution of a relationship.
To me, I think this is his most accessible and charming film, really. Though, when you mentioned The Master, I saw The Master about 4 times. I went down to London twice to see it. I forget whether it was in 65.
It was 70 mil.
70 mil. And actually there was just something about the tonalities of the color, and the glow of the color on the 70 mil that was just so beautiful, right? Kind of. And I thought there's a moment where you're seeing these images and they're shot in a 50s style like this is, right? But it had like a kind of a different tonality in the master. And then I think it's Ella Fitzgerald who begins to sing, right? And it was just, I thought it was magic, really. And I think a little bit about this film as well. It's a film that's kind of not really driven by plots or dialogue, right? That kind of, the images are almost everything, really. The image and the sound design, kind of.
Yeah, I think the soundtrack is fantastic. It's more given from what I know of Johnny Greenwood's music and from the music he made for There Will Be Blood. I don't know if he did the master or not, but I expected a kind of more, how to put it, wacky or unconventional, challenging soundtrack. But actually, it's beautiful, kind of piano and strings. That there's such a romantic feeling to the opening act.
Yes.
And the music really carries that, and it conveys it beautifully. And I think I was kind of blown away by the soundtrack. I think it's just beautiful music.
Yes, I think it's beautiful use of sound, throughout, really. Kind of, it's a film that makes the use of sound explicit, that draws your attention to it. I mean, I don't think it's any particular kind of wizardry, really. So, noise upsets him, so you hear these sounds very loudly, but nonetheless, kind of it draws attention to the sound. And once your attention is drawn to the sound in those scenes, it's kept kind of throughout for the rest of the film, in ways that are more subtle. So I thought it was beautiful. I think it's a really romantic film, and I think it's kind of oddly romantic because actually it, there is something kind of really fascinating about, this idea that basically you have to poison a man, in order to make him pay attention to you. And be involved in the present and now and not kind of, in the past or in the future. Yeah, you have to make him ill in order to make him open, emotionally open. I think that's kind of fascinating. Isn't that what the film?
Yeah, no, I'm not disagreeing with you. I mean, for the podcast listeners, I'm just sat here kind of staring into space. I mean, when it comes to interpreting the film, see, I at the moment I'm just thinking about everything on the surface,
right?
Which I think is, it's fine to appreciate the way it looks and the way it sounds and the performances, but I do feel that I'm struggling to dig into it. But then I'm sure it needs a second viewing. But I'm not sure if I want to see it a second time.
Oh, I definitely do.
Okay, I will then. But.
Yeah, I think it's beautiful. I think it's beautiful. I think it's romantic. I kind of like I said. The Alma character to me is like a Vermeer painting, and kind of. Like somehow your attention is drawn to her. She's really beautiful and intelligent and open, right? Kind of, so you get the feeling that she knows what she wants in general, right? But maybe not right at this moment, but she's willing to kind of, go into the unknown. Yeah, if it means kind of going with whom she knows she wants, which is him. Like kind of, it's kind of a very interesting it's a very interesting look and a very interesting performance, right? And you can understand completely why he becomes kind of involved with her and then besotted. And also what I think is so interesting about the film is you can understand why the sister and her become accomplices. Yeah, so they all have their own kind of area. Yeah, but kind of it's significant when the sister says, I like her and I respect her or something like that. Right. Very early on in their relationship. So I think it's an unusual and interesting kind of dynamic in the film, where you have like these really two smart and self-possessed women. This very intelligent and kind of artistic heterosexual man, right? Like kind of, the dynamics are all odd, like odd in the sense of being unusual, and I found them entrancing, actually.
I think the film, whether it's trying to or not is a different question, but I think the film doesn't avoid certain cliche of art, which is the best art. He is kind of a genius, Reynolds. This is what you kind of know of his work, and he's sought out by royals and things like this. But the film basically has this kind of suggestion that the greatest art comes through a kind of tortured process or a tortured person.
Yes.
There's very little room in his world for inspiration, other than I think right at the start when he meets Alma and takes her out for dinner, and then he kind of takes her measurements, and it's established that she is the perfect figure for him.
Yes. I think actually we're shown inspiration. I'd like to disagree with that. So, we're shown inspiration. I think kind of what we're not shown is joy.
I'm not sure we're shown inspiration either. We're shown work. He's always sitting there with his book, working.
Yes.
But I mean, you're absolutely right to point out that there's no joy in it. I don't think there's a moment where there's any joy in it. Even right at the start, like I say, when I think that is that one, that meeting of Alma, I think still that is kind of joyless once it gets down to the actual work. But I didn't even feel. Where do you think there's?
Well, I think she's the inspiration. And her whole body is the inspiration. Her demeanor is an inspiration. He begins to dress her as soon as he meets her, and it's by dressing her that he falls in love. So.
But apart from that, I mean, he makes dresses for other. He makes two wedding dresses.
Yes, but that's a source of friction because actually it's through the dress that he expresses his love. So actually, when he begins to make the wedding dress for that princess, she gets jealous. Yeah, and it's all about like kind of, the princess, and she tries to curse her. Right, because there's a line of dialogue at some point which says you never congratulate a bride because you congratulate a bride on the dress or whatever, kind of it means that the marriage won't go through. Yeah, so
and then she does. She says, "I wish you all the best for you."
Exactly.
Sure, but that's I think that's true. But I'm talking about from the character of Reynolds, this idea that he makes these great works. I don't think I think the film only talks about him as a kind of tortured, kind of negative way, as opposed to positive.
Well, he's definitely tortured. I think there's no question about that, right? Like, he's a screwed up person, and kind of, that's the interesting dynamic of the film. But he is, and it's got this weird. But the film sees him as an artist. There's no question. He's not a dressmaker. He's an artist, and he's an artist to the point where some people don't deserve to wear his dresses and he rips them off. Right, so they're all kind of cliche-ish. Actually, that is kind of cliche-ish, I would say. I've seen that before, but I don't have a problem with that.
No, I'm not sure I have a problem with anything that I'm kind of picking up on as a cliche, and I think the film is actually kind of conversant with it. I mean, this is a type of film that has a long history. The idea of this the tortured artist kind of thing, which is why I kind of picked up on and asked you what you made of that. But I don't think I have a problem with any of that. But I do think it falls into a trap every now and again.
I don't know.
Also, or rather kind of uses a cliche and then doesn't do enough with it.
I don't know. I mean, I think it's quite an original film to make a love story out of, or to make an expression of love and attempt at poisoning is to me quite original.
No.
I mean, it might not be. Someone will probably kind of come back to us and say, no, this 18th century novel was the plot. But, it felt original to me. And I enjoyed watching it. And actually, I think, several things. I think that, to me, the performances are extraordinary, And though I try to avoid talk on the films, I couldn't help but hear on Facebook people just bitching and bitching and bitching and bitching and bitching about kind of Day-Lewis, you know. So everybody was praising Leslie Manville, but kind of, you know, really snarky about Day-Lewis. I think he's fantastic.
I think he's fantastic.
I think she's fantastic. And I think Alma, Vicky Price, is, you know, a big new star. I don't remember seeing her before. I don't know whether she's German or Austrian or Dutch. But, you know, she was beautiful to look at. Just kind of a stunning presence, really. And that, alongside, you know, the cinematography and the images and the sounds, I just thought it was entrancing.
She's from Luxembourg.
She's from Luxembourg. And I think, you know, people who can't appreciate it don't know how to appreciate cinema. And they can fuck off.
What about the idea? There's something that struck me, which I didn't really make that very much of, but there are two moments where women are reduced to numbers. There's when he takes Alma out for dinner and then takes her measurements. There's just this list of numbers. Like I thought there were 3 measurements. You know, was it chest, waist, and hips, whatever. But there's just this litany of numbers that he starts reading off her.
Yes.
And Leslie Manville's character just writes them down, and not even saying like this is her arm, this is her leg, whatever. It's just a list of numbers. Apparently, they all just know what they are. Yes. They're so professional at this. But there's that, and then there's the fashion show, which takes place in the house, where it's just, you know, like they're sent down the catwalk, wearing dresses. The models are, but they all hold numbers.
Yes,
number 11, number 5, number 6, whatever. And again, it's just like the idea that there's no identity to these women. They are what they're wearing. They are what they're made of and what they're dressed as.
Yes, now that also was interesting, I suppose, because usually they would be given a number, but the dress would be announced, or, you know, it was quite common to give dresses names, like, right. You know. And
actually, the very, very beginning of the film starts off with Alma talking to someone who you don't see for a long time, and she says something like, I've given him what he wants, something like this. I've given him what he wants, and what's that? Every piece of me, you know, pieces of it, as opposed to me.
Yes,
she refers to herself as a series of parts, as opposed to a person.
Yes,
which, you know, and again, this was something that I was kind of, I guess, looking for, and I always find this, that I kind of notice something and then I can't make it add up to anything.
Well, I mean, you know, sometimes you just have to see things again. But let's at least encourage people, you know, to go see it, yeah? I think, to me, it's one of his very greatest films. One of his most beautiful, and actually one of his most challenging, because, you know, I think kind of the meaning and the beauty come from the tone, the images, and the sounds. You know, it's kind of, it requires a more skilled viewer than
I am.
No, then
it also, I think, takes someone who's conversant with films of this nature, maybe old British films, or films about fashion, and films about the films that have a kind of tortured genius aspect to them, which I think are not films that I feel particularly conversant with.
Well, you mentioned Tortured Genius, and you just like put off half the audience, really.
Well, that's because I think it's very easy. Yeah, it sounds very dismissive, doesn't it? Oh, it's a Tortured Genius film, but like, no, actually, it's trying to. I mean, it's telling an interesting story, and these are interesting characters. Like, whether he's a Tortured Genius or not, like it is more than whatever cliches you can kind of pick out of it.
The thing about Paul Thomas Anderson films is that I normally half like them, you know, like kind of, I find them intriguing or experimental, or like Boogie Nights and so on. And then, you know, for example, like Inherent Vice, like you kind of forget them, really. Like
I forgot that,
yeah. It doesn't, you know, so I think there are moments, like Punch Drunk Love, I love. There are shots in Boogie Nights. I did love The Master, actually.
The Master, I just remember coming out and thinking that he's made the great American novel. Like, people are always talking about The Great Gatsby and how do you put that on film? It's like, no, he's done it. He's made the great American novel on film somehow.
Yeah, I certainly thought so. As I said, I saw that 4 times, so that's definitely stayed with me. But I think this is his most accessible and beautiful film, really.
I'd have to see Punch Drunk Love again, because I think that in those, if you're talking about it as accessible, I think that might rifle it.
Right.
And also, I mean, that's it's quite brief, Punch Drunk Love. I remember it being 90, maybe 100 minutes long at most. And it has this. It's certainly bizarre and kind of off kilter, but it's also kind of light. And I think you can get attached to the characters quite easily in the way that you can with this as well. I think the characters in There'll Be Blood and The Master are harder to connect to, and I think that's probably what you're talking about. I think how easily you can kind of get along with them or feel like you understand them.
Yes, I don't know. I mean,
that's certainly the way I feel anyway.
I thought it was very beautiful, and I love the people in them. I love the Leslie Manville character. I couldn't stop looking at Alma, and Daniel Day-Lewis, I think, is just great. So, that in this world with this theme is something that I just found like really beautiful.
Film's dedicated to Jonathan Demme,
right.
which you would have known if you'd stuck around to the end of the credits.
Yes, I'm old and I've got to go to the toilet after 3 hours.
It's not 3 hours.
No, but
it's how long is it?
It must be about 2 hours.
2 hours 10.
Yeah. So,
yeah, I feel like we probably should see it again. I think we've definitely got to get my brother on, because I know he's bursting to talk about it, and I'm sure I've let him down very badly by not making much of it right now. But I mean, I didn't want to come across too negative. Like, I had a really good time watching it, and I think you're absolutely right that it is, if not his most accessible film, one of them. And I mean, it is extraordinarily beautiful to look at, and it is beguiling. It's got a beautiful kind of flow and feeling to it.
And it's
well worth it. Sorry,
it's also slightly twisted.
Yeah.
So the combination of beguiling, twisted, performances. It's a very intriguing film. And
it's beautifully evocative and well worth watching. I don't think I've really felt anything for the I mean, if it's really meant to be a romance, or as I say, really meant to be a romance, if it's meant to be a romance in as much as you perhaps suggested, then for me it's a kind of failure, because I just didn't really feel anything. I didn't feel like when they kind of figure out at the end of the film, what their relationship is and how to be happy, I didn't feel anything for them really. I don't know about you.
Well, I don't know about feel. Like, I mean, I felt throughout the film, as you heard, I'm sure, because I thought it was unexpectedly funny. It's the humor is quite black, but I loved it. And the love story is quite unusual. But I'm a sucker for people who are recessive, and who are trying to communicate and can't find a way, and somehow, a way is bridged, right? Which I think is what happens in this film, and I think it's also kind of an interesting message that we're not all alike,
I agree with that. I mean, I also really enjoy stories about people who deeply want to communicate and don't know how, or trying to, and maybe that's why I feel slightly let down or disappointed by this, because I think it is absolutely about that, and then when it kind of happens, I didn't feel very much. Whereas normally I love that kind of thing.
Though, yes, I mean, the thing about inciting feeling, is, I mean, because I just think some filmmakers are actually not. That's not what they set out to do, and because of that, they don't do it. So on the one hand, somebody like Almodovar can take any material and make people feel, and then I think Thomas Anderson is not that type of filmmaker. I mean, he gets you to think, you know, and he sets a tone and he sets a mood, and you know, he might be seductive, you know, but this sense of feeling instantly accessible pleasures throughout, I don't think that's, you know,
Yeah,
you need to.
that's fair. I mean, yeah. Well, in that case, then it's not fair to call it a failure, but it's just fair to call it not entirely my style.
Fair enough.
Which is fair enough. I also, but just one last thing. You talked about the humour, and I love the use of the word "fuck."
Yes.
They say "fuck" about 10 times, and it's all Danny Day-Lewis's character getting frustrated. And what I love about that is there's an element of there's always something slightly kooky going on in Paul Thomas Anderson's films. So there's that point in There Will Be Blood, which is set in the early 1900s in the kind of Wild West. There's that point where the brother character comes in and he introduces himself. He says, "I'm your brother from another mother." And although it makes sense, it's also a silly thing to put in there. There's that bit in Punch Drunk Love where, which is also a film thinking about it, about a guy, a male character who's kind of slightly nuts, who's just surrounded by women. I have to watch that film again. But there's that point in it where he says things are very food. And he says, what? Things are very good. And that apparently came from a typo. Paul Thomas Anderson accidentally wrote food in the script and then thought, well, I'll keep it there. There's always something like that going on. And I think the use of the word fuck in Phantom Thread is the same sort of thing, because it's really out of place. Although it's not like people never said fuck. Of course they said fuck back then. It's not a new swear word. But but it's so unusual to hear it in a film like this.
Yes.
And it's kind of bracing and it's edgy and it's funny. To hear just, you know, he says fuck off, and then he wants the doctor to fuck off, and he says fuck off, and Alma then says, I think it's clear he wants you to fuck off.
Yes.
You know, it's funny, and it's got a great, there's a real command of tone.
Yes.
Nothing feels out of place.
Yes, that's a wonderful way of putting it, actually. And we should end here.
Yes. I think it's reasonable to suggest that we're probably going to come back on it.
Yes.
And give it another go. And like I said, I need to get my
with
brother
guests.
involved. Yeah, I've got to get my brother involved. I mean, my brother's not nobody. He was also taught film by Jose, as I was. And he's been to the London Film School. He graduated from there not long ago. Yeah. So, I mean, you know, he knows his stuff.
All right, let's end here.
We're on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Eavesdropping at the Movies. We're on Facebook, Eavesdropping at the Movies. We're on Twitter, @Eavesdrop Movies. You know, drop us a line. We'll be getting compliments left, right and centre. But to be fair, they're all going to Jose personally, and I didn't see any of them.
Yes.
So,
yes,
you know,
don't make him a Cinderfella.
Because Jose's on Twitter @JoseArroyo16. And I'm Michael_J_Glass. And, you know, I'm just saying, like, send me a few compliments, please. Because Jose's getting involved, and it makes me feel left out.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, poor baby.
I know, I'm going to start poisoning people.
Might get you somewhere. Might get you love. All right. Let's end it here.
Goodbye.